This is Linda Fabula, 2 Chronicles 7. Solomon and Israel removed the ark from the tabernacle of David this morning, sacrificing so many animals along the way that they, quote, could not be counted for multitude, end quote. When they set the ark in the temple, Yahweh filled the temple with a cloud of glory as Solomon and the people stood there watching. Solomon prayed an epic prayer, and with the animals on the altar ready to be burned, verse 1, now when Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and Yahweh's glory filled the house. The priest could not enter into Yahweh's house because Yahweh's glory filled Yahweh's house. Comment, the glory was there before Solomon prayed, and it's still there. Verse 3. All the children of Israel looked on when the fire came down, and Yahweh's glory was on the house. They bowed themselves with their faces to the ground on the pavement, worshipped, and gave thanks to Yahweh, saying, For he is good, for his loving kindness endures forever. Comment, that was the phrase the Levites sang a few minutes ago in the last chapter, to which Yahweh first responded with the glory. In verse 1 we just read, after the prayer, fire came down from heaven on the altar, and the glory was billowing out of the temple by this time, because in verse 3 all the people saw the glory, and they saw the fire coming down. They repeated the phrase that started it all, for he is good, his loving kindness endures forever, end quote. Now we might pause here and ask, how is Yahweh good and how is his covenant good, when in the second half of Leviticus 26 he promises to bring horrendous catastrophes on them if they're disobedient? That would be looking at the covenant with hindsight. When Yahweh first presented it to them, beginning in Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, the very first words of the covenant were, quote, You've seen what I did to the Egyptians, end quote. In other words, Israel had seen how Yahweh devastated them. So it was full transparency on Yahweh's part. This is what type of God I am. But a few verses later, all Israel agreed with joy to accept his covenant and to take him as their God. Then, in the next chapter, as he was delivering the 10 Commandments to them, the second commandment warned them, quote, I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, end quote. All the while there was their foreboding thundering, lightning, and darkness on the mountain. In the next 3 chapters, which was an overview of all the law to come, he said the penalty for certain things would be death. He said his angel would be with them and warn them not to provoke his angel because he wouldn't pardon their disobedience, chapter 23, verse 21. To all of which the people agreed with one voice, quote, All the words which Yahweh has spoken we will do, chapter 24, verse 3. So on the front end, the people knew he was a very good God, and they knew the covenant was good because they snatched it up with enthusiasm. Afterward, Yahweh remained the same good God they thought he was, but the people weren't what they thought they were. So that's where the evil entered in. The evil was theirs, not Yahweh's. So we shouldn't judge the covenant on the way it turned out. We should judge it on the way Israel inspected it on the front end and agreed that it was very good and that the God who was making it with them was a very desirable God. Now they're agreeing to God's goodness and the goodness of the covenant again. Quote, For he is good, his loving kindness endures forever, end quote. And once more they've got it exactly right. Verse 4, Then the king and all the people offered sacrifices before Yahweh. King Solomon offered a sacrifice of 22,000 head of cattle and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the people dedicated God's house. The priests stood according to their positions, the Levites also with instruments of music of Yahweh, which David the king had made to give thanks to Yahweh, when David praised by their ministry, saying, For his loving kindness endures forever. The priests sounded trumpets before them, and all Israel stood. Comment, the new altar wasn't big enough for all those animals, so verse 7. Moreover, Solomon made the middle of the court that was before Yahweh's house holy, for there he offered the burnt offerings and the fat of the peace offerings, because the bronze altar which Solomon had made was not able to receive the burnt offering, the meal offering, and the fat. So Solomon held the feast at that time for 7 days, and all Israel with him a very great assembly, from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt. On the 8th day they held a solemn assembly, for they kept the dedication of the altar 7 days, and the feast 7 days. Comment, it's hard to pick up on here, but those 7 days plus 7 days ran in series. It was a total of 2 weeks. It started a week ahead of the Feast of Tabernacles when they moved the ark and dedicated the temple. Then it took 7 days to properly sanctify the altar according to the ordinance, Exodus 29:37. Then the altar was ready to go for the Feast of Tabernacles, which was the 15th to the 21st of the month, according to the ordinance in Leviticus 23:36. Following that, there was the required 8th day of assembly, Leviticus 23:39, which makes 2 weeks and a day total. The next day, which was the 23rd, verse 10, on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people away to their tents, joyful and glad of heart for the goodness that Yahweh had shown to David and to Solomon and to Israel his people. Comment, tents is also translated homes. Many, if not most of them, lived in stone houses. Joshua 24:13, Leviticus 14:42, and Deuteronomy 22:8. It was unusual to live in a tent. Jeremiah 35:7. Verse 11. Thus Solomon finished Yahweh's house and the king's house, and he successfully completed all that came into Solomon's heart to make in Yahweh's house and in his own house. Comment, Yahweh answered Solomon by fire and glory. Now he'll answer in words. Verse 12. Yahweh appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I've heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself for a house of sacrifice. If I shut up the sky so that there is no rain, or if I command the locust to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among the people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to prayer that is made in this place. For now I have chosen and made this house holy, that my name may be there forever, and my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. Comment, verse 14 is one of the most well-known verses in the Old Testament. It comes up whenever we're praying for national revival. Quote, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and heal their land. End quote. In verse 16, Yahweh said his name and heart will be on the temple forever and perpetually, but he's about to qualify that coming up. Verse 17, as for you, if you walk before me as David your father walked, and do according to all that I've commanded you, and will keep my statutes and my ordinances, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom, according as I covenanted with David your father, saying there shall not fail you a man to be ruler in Israel. But if you turn away and forsake my statutes and my commandments which I've set before you, and shall go and serve other gods and worship them, then I'll pluck them up by the roots out of my land which I've given them, and this house which I've made holy for my name I will cast out of my sight, and I'll make it a proverb and a byword among all peoples. Comment in verse 20, Yahweh will make the temple, quote, a proverb and byword among all peoples, end quote. Also translated an object of mockery and ridicule among all the nations. That was a reminder of the original covenant. It's still in place. Not only the blessings for obedience, but also destruction for disobedience, even destruction of this new fine temple. Verse 21. This house which is so high, everyone who passes by it shall be astonished and say, why has Yahweh done this to this land and to this house? They shall answer, because they abandoned Yahweh, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and took other gods, worshipped them, and served them. Therefore he's brought all this evil on them. Comment, 2 Chronicles 8 is next. In your narrator's view, this chapter was the zenith of Old Testament Israel. Over the next 18 generations, it'll be a long, slow descent into destruction. But the listener shouldn't turn the story off now, because there'll be a lot of bright spots and amazing things along the way. And after the Babylonian captivity, Yahweh will restore Israel to the land for a fresh start. His loving kindness endures forever. 2 Chronicles 8 is next.